Namaste, Dumalang, Sambonani, and welcome to the Avrik podcast, a podcast that aims to bring clarity to the concept of violence and its consequences in the lives of victims and survivor groups, as well as the perpetrators and their descendants.
In this episode, extraordinary Professor John Brewer seeks to reclaim public value, discusses morally constituted knowledge, and asks what it means to embody an ethics of social transformation within the university.
It truly is a privilege to be in Stellenbosch. I have argued for a long time now, indeed argued against the popular trend which addresses public impact. I've argued that public value is integral to the very nature of the social sciences. The social sciences emerged as separate disciplines out of moral philosophy in the 18th century, precisely in order to better diagnose and improve the social condition. So engagement with social and human progress, with improvement and betterment, marks their origins and their contribution to the public good. And my argument is thus simple and clear-cut. Making people aware of themselves as comprising a society helps in the dissemination and development of key social and moral values. Values that make society possible. Cultural values, moral values like trust, empathy, altruism, tolerance, compromise. The public value of the social sciences gives the social sciences two qualities against which we can assess their ethical status. They not only generate information about society, they are the medium for society's reproduction. They are the way in which society can find out about itself and in so doing generate the idea of society itself. So my argument is thus simple and clear-cut. Making people aware of themselves as comprising a society helps in the development and dissemination of key social and moral values that make society possible. These moral values assist in society's ongoing betterment and improvement. The social sciences help us understand the conditions which both promote and undermine these values. And it helps identify the sorts of public policies, the sorts of behaviors and relationships that inhibit moral virtues like trust, empathy, compromise, and altruism. And thus it is for these reasons that social science is a public good. The question I want to ask today is, how does this relate to the idea of the moral responsibility of the university? Let me begin pressingly before I move upliftingly. The old public university is dead. It has been a slow and lingering death, excruciating, painful to people like me who's been forced to observe it. Its corpse lies lifeless in every senior manager's meeting, in every classroom, in every tutorial venue, in every staff office, in every boarded up common room, and every closed bookshop. The rise of incivility and discourtesy in managers is paralleled by the rise in the tendency of staff to whinge and whine. Its death has not been the responsibility of any one university or any one government. Its degradation began long ago in the neoliberalization and marketization of higher education. Now, if you like alliterations, as I do, the university has lost funding, lost function, but now must find fidelity. Fidelity means moral virtue, honesty, loyalty, faithfulness, reliability, dependability, commitment, responsibility, trustworthiness. These are the words that describe moral virtues, moral purposes. And in making universities business-like, universities have been turned into businesses where profit and loss, product differentiation, unique selling points, and value for money has destroyed their sense of moral virtue and moral purpose. And if value is their only contribution to the economy, then they have no value. Making money without a sense of the moral purpose to which you put that money is not value. Value is worth. Value is esteem. Value is social good. Value is moral virtue. So by turning universities into businesses, falling down on the profit side of the financial bottom line becomes their chief aim. Means replace ends, and the goal of universities becomes self-reproduction. Surviving as a business becomes an end in itself. Now, I want to uplift you. We should now rebuild. We should now reshape. We should now refashion the university morally. Universities began as primarily medieval institutions created by the church. These medieval institutions are no longer fit for the purpose of a global late modern society. Universities need to change to equip themselves for the 21st century. And I want to talk today merely about one of those changes, the pressing need for the universities to recapture their soul. A phrase I borrowed from Chris Brink, former Vice-Chancellor at Stellenbosch. And we both couch this deliberately in ecclesiastical language, evocative of the university's medieval past. This is more than just playful irony. We need to take back from the marketeers a moral dimension, helping the universities to rediscover their moral purpose, which makes them truly universities relevant to the 21st century rather than to the 15th. This requires that we redefine their public value and make themselves relevant to the complex problems threatening the very future of humankind, including problems like social transformation, human rights protections, the elimination of poverty, and the elimination of social suffering. This requires more change to universities, not less. It requires broader visions for universities, not narrow ones. And it requires greater ambition, not smaller ones. And it requires universities to be outward-facing with a renewed sense of their public purpose and civic engagement. It requires, in short, an ethical obligation to take sides, if you like. This requires us to make a difference to people's lives. Universities have a responsibility to make a difference to people's lives, locally and globally. It requires them to be reliable and trustworthy in seeing through this moral responsibility, despite the financial bottom line or the demands of the marketeers. And this is what I consider to be the university's moral virtue, its moral value. If you like, its vocation. It gives it back, its moral virtue. This means that to be renewed, a university should operate now by 4 key principles. This is over and above excellence in learning, teaching, education, and research. These remain and are taken for granted. But there are 4 key principles on top of excellence in learning, education, and research. First key principle, universities should have an obligation to the betterment and improvement of society. Secondly, universities should practice an ethical responsibility to the society in which they are located. Thirdly, universities should promote the advancement of what I call morally constituted knowledge. In teaching, education, and research, we should garner, collect, and teach morally constituted knowledge, by which I mean knowledge directed towards the social good and the elimination of harm. Fourthly, finally, universities should commit themselves to helping understand the global challenges that risk the very future of humankind and which threaten the global social good. Universities need to be local and global at the same time. I believe that this requires universities to become reconciled to a fundamental change in their self-image. They remain places of learning, excellence in learning, education, and research. They should remain inherently scientific, but they should now also see themselves as inherently moral at the same time. By committing themselves to a moral responsibility, we get universities committed to the collection and interrogation of evidence that analyzes ethical problems. Universities should address themselves to injustice, to inequality, to suffering, to the analysis of the structural processes that promote or inhibit the realization of social betterment, that inhibit the meeting of human need and wants. Universities should not practice moral indifference, concerned to protect its narrow reputation under the guise of being businesslike. Universities should make a fundamental contribution to assisting the local society emerge out of conflict and to assist the global society to deal with the promotion of the social good and the elimination of harm. That is the measure of a university's reputation, its contribution to local, global, social good. The vital moral responsibility of universities, therefore, is to be a civilizing and humanizing mirror for societies to see themselves, to learn about themselves, to facilitate debates and judgments about how we realize the social good and how we eliminate social suffering. It should advance teaching and research that is publicly engaged, driven by local and global societal challenges, and capable of scientific and objective practice that is based on explicit ethical responsibility. That is how we measure the reputation of a morally responsible university. Now, I am not here talking about public impact. Much to the chagrin of my fellow academics, I have said before that impact is a sheep in wolves' clothing. I will repeat that since it may not be difficult to assimilate on first hearing. A sheep in wolves' clothing. That is, it is not as problematic as it appears. All research should and can have some benefit. The problem with impact, as higher education managers see it, is in reliably measuring it. No, I'm not talking about it. I'm talking today about the principles that are much wider than impact. I am referring to universities coming to recognize that they have explicitly ethical and moral responsibilities more than business ones. It is, of course, easy for universities to pay lip service to such rhetoric, but words are not enough. Universities must practice ethical responsibility. It must promote in staff and students, promote in porters and professors, promote in cleaners and clinicians the practice of ethical responsibility. This means more change to universities, not less. Broader visions, not narrow profit and loss ones. And taller trees to climb, not just shrubs. This means, I believe, that universities must reorganize, must reconfigure their teaching and research to facilitate ethically responsible teaching, research, and civic engagement. I believe that the disciplines should come out from their professional silos. Universities should dismantle their ivory towers. That is to say, they must choose a side. And the side that they must choose is moral responsibility. Moral responsibility to assist a society emerging out of conflict, to assist in the understanding of local conditions and global ones at the same time. So the research and teaching landscapes should be reconfigured so that we develop public knowledge, a form of morally constituted knowledge that speaks to the social good and the elimination of social harm. So we must facilitate post-disciplinary innovation necessary to the nature of 21st century problem. Universities still are structured mainly by essentially medieval academic structures and disciplines. We should reconfigure to promote interdisciplinarity, to promote collaboration across the fields, because the massive problems that we face in the 21st century for the future of humankind are not disciplinary, they're post or interdisciplinary. And I believe that public universities should transcend the gulf between universities and the society in which they are located. They should transcend this gulf. We should bring the real world into the classroom and take the classroom out into the real world. We should be promoting an ethos of civic engagement as well as excellent scholarship. In our teaching and research, we should not so much aim to train minds, but to change minds. And change minds in a way that changes their society by promoting human betterment, human improvement, meeting the needs of ordinary men and women. I believe that the university is too important to be left to marketeers. Universities need to belong to us all. And the way to take back ownership of the university is through what I call the re-enchantment of the university. My language of re-enchantment is again ecclesiastical, fitting the ideas that universities should reclaim their soul. But there is a sociology, a political economy, if you like, behind this re-enchantment. I locate this re-enchantment in global structural and material conditions that have reawakened moral sensibility, that have reawakened the idea that universities ought to have a moral responsibility. Very briefly, the late modernity is characterized by great technological advance, but also increased vulnerabilities, significantly increased inequalities. And I want to emphasize 4 features. The political economy of late modernity is characterized by an increase in wealth disparity, an increased impoverishment of the global south, but also an impoverishment of growing sections of the global north left behind as casualties of neoliberal economics. And the concentration of wealth in fewer and fewer hands is matched by increased vulnerabilities amongst the rest of us, increased risks to global economic trends, to climate change, to organized violence, and the rest of these vulnerabilities. So late modernity is a risk society. We have increased risks and increased sensitivities to these risks. And with these increased risks comes increased vulnerability. So the lived experience of globalization is not just one of new opportunities of hope, it is simultaneously one of fear, anxiety, suffering, hate, genocidal othering. A second feature, I think, is that the growth of organized violence is changing the nature of late modernity. This has led to both more war and an increase in the moral degradation of war. What Mary Kaldor calls new wars no longer exist between identifiable armies on a set battlefield, observing the Geneva Conventions of War. There's no longer a distinction between civilian and combatant. The human body has been turned into a battlefield, particularly women's bodies. And there's a moral innovation of the enemy, stripping them of their human dignity, which has led both to the wide availability of sophisticated weaponry to attack whole communities, as well as the use of de-technological forms of weaponry against the body. This has seen the return of the machete as a weapon. So the re-enchantment in late modernity is in effect a return to genocide as a contemporary experience. Thirdly, there has been a collapse in the public-private distinction in late modernity. Public space has been domesticated. A range of behaviours and emotions which once were reserved to the private sphere now enter the public and political discourse. So we have a language of modern politics which is about identity, about religion, about emotion, about authenticity, and sadly in some cases about hate. Hate speech, xenophobia, ethnic and religious othering have been normalized by a public discourse, by politicians and in political rhetoric. Fourth feature, the fear of the enemy within has been matched by a moral responsibility to strangers. But no longer are strangers distant. Globalization compresses time and space in a way that brings distant suffering into people's living rooms and onto their social media screens and smartphone. The political economy of reenchantment has at one and the same time increased moral sensibility to suffering and harm, and increased the moral innovation and degradation of our enemies. We are both sensitive to the suffering of strangers and fearful of them. We show greater levels of emotional empathy to people just like ourselves and draw ever more narrow boundaries around those whom we exclude. Two things follow for the public university. First, universities should meet the need for morally constituted knowledge orientated to the promotion of the social good and the elimination of social harm. In the currency of our teaching, in the currency of our research, and in our civic engagements, we have a concern to eliminate poverty, eliminate disease, promote health, promote jobs, promote good housing, end social suffering, and promote human rights and human dignity. Secondly, I believe universities need to be restructured to realign their teaching and research in order to promote this morally constituted knowledge, to promote interdisciplinary engagement through which colleagues can combine in imaginative and creative ways in order to deliver morally constituted knowledge. I want to conclude by reflecting on the specific location of Stellenbosch. Like my own university, Queen's University, it's in a society emerging out of conflict. And while Stellenbosch is in such a place, it should not be of that place. Stellenbosch has a responsibility to assist local society while also being global in the challenges it addresses. In research, in teaching and civic engagement, it must address the morally constituted knowledge necessary to create citizens of the new South Africa, helping ordinary men and women with the issues that dominate their lives as they learn to live together after violence. Issues of health, transport, infrastructure, road building, as much as emotional healing and forgiveness. Now, this task is both global and local at the same time. We must be creating global citizens who are capable to engage locally as well as globally. We must be creating global citizens, active in global society, but contributing and solving the moral challenges of the society in which Stellenbosch is located. This is a difficult task. It's not a task easy to balance. But the moral responsibility of Stellenbosch is to be dominated by the immediate needs of the society that is emerging out of conflict, a society in which it is still locally embedded despite passage of time. And it must use this local engagement to create global citizens capable of dealing with challenges at the global level. This should be the goal of Stellenbosch University's administrative restructuring, of its curriculum reform, of its research and teaching ambitions. It must be the goal of its civic responsibilities to think and act globally in order to change the local. That is the side on which the university should be on. Thank you very much.
Hi, my name is Rose
Hello.
Pure and I'm a master's student and I'm staff as well. So I'm interested in more the transactionality between the university with students and staff. So we find that obviously one has to pay fees to come to a university space, and there's also transactionality between staff having to do labor in order to be in the university space, and then the university obviously transacting that by paying them in return. So how do we reconcile that business framework in that transactionality with the need for more responsibility and ethics in terms of how we inhabit the space as an institution?
That's a very good question, and thank you. Mine is not a lament for the dead to be resurrected. I think neoliberalism has worked its damage. Fees, transactionality are with us. What I've tried to do is to argue, however, that in addition to being business-like, business should not be the ambition of the university. It needs to have a broader vision, to move to other parts of the forest where there are taller trees, to have more change. And I'm suggesting that that broader vision should be conceived in terms of its ethical obligation, both locally and globally, to assist in social betterment and human improvement. And I think it's very, very important for students and staff who have this transactional relationship with the university to start to take ownership of it. I think it's very, very important for the identity of a student and the identity of a staff to believe that they are making a difference. That's why I say the end of our teaching should be the creation of minds capable of changing society. We should be global citizens, willing to work locally and globally to make a difference. So your experience here, for which you pay fees and which you will continue to pay fees, sadly, is not just about getting a degree and walking along a platform, shaking the hands of the Vice-Chancellor, and then say thank you very much. It is about you going under fundamental change with a form of teaching, a form of engagement, an encouragement of civic responsibility in which you undergo change in order to equip you to make a change in society, locally and globally. And at least then you can feel that the fees you've paid for, not just to get a scroll, whether in Latin or not, but the fees that you paid are making a contribution locally and globally. That's the best we can do because, quite frankly, as I said, the corpse is lifeless and will remain so. And public moral responsibility is the best way in which we could resurrect soul of the university.
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you. Fantastic lecture. My name is Janae Hector Kaname. I'm the Deputy Director for the Division Social Impact. And I want to ask a question just in terms of whose university is this? Because our work in social impact is really around preparing young minds for the future. So we have a training course that trains young people, and then we go out into the surrounding communities to do work in terms of reciprocal partnerships. But what we've noticed of late, over the past couple of years, is that students have said, we don't want to go outside because the needs within the institution are so great. And so for me, I want to ask the question around the misrecognized within this institution. Who is this institution geared to? Is it an elitist institution that deals with the affluent and people that can afford education? Because the greatest need now for students is around food insecurity. It's around fees. It's around accommodation. And so students are less keen to go and meet the needs of the local community outside, but the needs of the internal community are growing rapidly because we are not geared to actually serve a diverse student community as it is.
I believe in some ways that the university needs to consider the university as part of its research agenda. That in assisting ordinary men and women to learn to live together in a society emerging out of conflict requires also that it focuses its lens on it as an institution, and it explores the dynamics of social relations on campus, explores some of the issues around the diversification of its student population, issues that are born unequally and disproportionately. And I think that in many ways, we ought to be making this Stellenbosch University a subject of research as much as the social conditions around. But that will be true of my own institution as well. The only advantage of my own institution is that we've had longer at it. And when I said that Stellenbosch, like Queen's, like other universities, is both in but not of the place, it has to recognize that it itself needs to be interrogated and analyzed. And its practices, institutional dimensions, its student policies, its student demography needs to be thoroughly interrogated. So the university itself becomes subject to its own moral responsibility.
Professor Aslan Patar?
Yeah, good afternoon. Thank you very much, Professor. That was a very compelling and utterly convincing presentation. And I accept fully the terms of the argument that you made. And I establish the term upon which you made your argument. It's just one issue that I want to ask you. On the one hand, you posit the ethical dimensions of the university as the basis for its transformative intent. On the other hand, we live in the predominant transactional university or the instrumentalist university. How do you span the gaps? What's the strategy? What's the conceptualization from the one to the other?
Thank you very much. That repeats the question we had at the very, very beginning. I believe that the old university is dead, corpse is lifeless, it will not be resurrected. We have to live with, sadly, the decline in public funding and the decline of public function. The way that we can compensate for that, I believe, is to start to recognize the moral responsibility we have that moves us beyond just being business-like. Universities have to be businesses, but they can be more than that. They can have a moral and ethical life that requires, I believe, a new approach to teaching, a new approach to research, and a new approach to civic engagement, as well as a reconfiguring, a restructuring, an administrative realignment that promotes this ethical engagement, this interdisciplinary collaboration, that promotes the idea that we judge our reputation not by whether that reputation can be damaged to threaten profit and loss, but whether we are making a difference in the lives of ordinary men and women. We are creating global citizens with a changed mind, capable of changing the society, and indeed also capable of changing the university. And it's that a bigger ambition, that taller tree, that I believe can shift the nature of the transactional university towards a university with a moral responsibility.
My name is Claire. I'm a postgraduate student in the law faculty and a research assistant there. I wholeheartedly agree with you on the premise that this university has a moral obligation to the public good and that many students and staff on this campus do as well. However, I do think if one had to consider what the realization of that could look like from a student's perspective, it remains fundamentally important to ensure that students are taught in a way that leaves them alive to the need to do good in the community. But many students come to this university because they need a degree to enter into the job field. And from that perspective, should we also not realize that for many people, it's a very socioeconomically vulnerable country we find ourselves in, the prioritization of the private good is also important. And should we not focus on how can we try and teach people to practice private good in a way that does not detract from the public good? Or is that a different side of the same coin?
I understand the question very well. Thank you very much. I do accept I have taught in universities now for 46 years. I understand the motives that many students bring to their degree. They want a job. They want a scroll. They don't want to be engaged in the classroom. They just want to head down, take notes, and be passive. They just want to get a good job and what that brings. I believe that the private good of individuals is their own responsibility. I believe that as a teacher in a university, that is, after all, a public institution, I have a responsibility to promote the public good, but also to facilitate your ambitions to get excellence in teaching, excellence in research, and excellence in education that you can then use to fulfill your ambitions for a good job. I do not see it in any way as incompatible to start to persuade universities to create citizens with a global perspective willing to work locally. I do not see how that can be incompatible with getting a good job. I think we are in societies, you and I, Northern Ireland and South Africa, we are in societies that have immense structural, fundamental problems and problems around the emotional landscape of the people in it. We need to engage with those structural, global, local problems. We need to address the difficulties in the emotional landscape of ordinary men and women emerging out of society, a society that's undergoing fundamental change. I don't see how that will stop you getting a good job or getting a good degree. Being able to have a scroll that persuades an employer who's also located in that very same structure, who might value you because you can demonstrate you are a global citizen committed to social change locally and globally. I don't see these as any way incompatible. So you are the main person responsible for your private good. The role of an ethical university is to promote the public good in such a way that you can get what you want from a university in terms of a scroll and a job. And I don't see them as in any way being incompatible.
I am Dr. Sanger from the English department at Stellenbosch. And I wanted to think a little bit about this whole idea of individualism, which of course is tied to the more business-oriented approach of universities. And it also ties in with what René was saying about how if students are not interested in going out to do the social work, and if we are not as educators teaching students or engaging them within the space of the classroom about the fact that Stellenbosch operates essentially because of its history in South Africa and then of course globally, operates on individualist principles. So when we talk about the private good, for example, we need to be thinking about, as you said, the connection between the private good as an individualist stance that students should not be seeing as the primary way in which they understand their own education in a society that is so clearly unequal and continues to become more and more unequal. And so for me, I appreciate the fact that this whole idea of how we engage students in moving away from those individualist forms of thinking to understand what their responsibilities actually are in the society in which Stellenbosch University finds itself, and then of course also Stellenbosch in relation to the rest of the world.
Thank you very much. I mean, you have got to the very heart of the problem of a university in a society emerging out of conflict. You could be talking about Queen's University 20 years ago. We attract a certain kind of student. Does the university have to live with that student and continue to meet the needs of that student, unwilling and unable to change its composition and its diversity? Or does the university begin to position itself in such a way as to attract a broader student body? A student body equipped to fulfill the moral responsibility of the university. So should we be stuck with what we have, or should we try to change what we attract? And that is why I said, I think in some ways, local society that we should be beginning to interrogate and analyze needs also to include the university itself. And I think the key to Stellenbosch's ethical responsibility, moral responsibility, is to address the way in which its structures, its recruitment strategy, its ways of teaching, its administrative structures does not equip it to be a morally responsible university in a society undergoing change.
Thank you for listening to this podcast. For more, you can check out our website.